I didn't expect to meet you here.
I was about to walk into his office when I heard my name slip through the crack in the door. Then I heard the word ugly. Then I heard the word bet. The air froze inside me. But the worst part wasn't what his friends said. The worst part was his answer. Low, with a held-back laugh, with the $100,000 check sitting there on the desk, waiting to be torn up. They'd bet my boss he couldn't take me to a gala. The ugly secretary with the heavy glasses, the same one he'd barely even greeted in the hallway for 2 years. I should have turned around and walked back to my desk, but I lifted my chin, took 3 deep breaths, and stepped into his office. If they wanted to play a game, the game was going to be played my way. Except sometimes playing games brings consequences we're not ready to face. Hi, I'm Kay. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. In front of everyone. The alarm buzzed at 6:30, and I'd already been awake for 10 minutes, staring at the crack in my bedroom ceiling. The apartment in Queens was small enough for me to know every flaw in the paint, every noise in the plumbing, every creak of the kitchen door when the wind hit the window. I got up without rushing, because rushing never helped. The 7:15 train leaves at the same time, rain or shine. I picked the gray cotton blouse, the straight skirt I always wore, the flat shoes that didn't hurt until nighttime. I pulled my hair into a tight bun, put on my thick-framed glasses, and checked the mirror for 3 seconds before heading out. Nobody on the street ever noticed me, and I was grateful for that every single day. The walk to the station took 8 minutes, and the subway car came packed, like always. I squeezed in between a man in a rumpled suit and a woman sleeping on her feet with her fingers hooked around the bar. I crossed Manhattan while the train rocked, not thinking much beyond the day ahead. I got off at the Midtown station at 7:50. The Ashcroft Holdings building rose up on the corner, all dark glass, with the discreet logo etched into the marble wall at the entrance. I walked past reception with a nod to the security guard, got into the executive elevator, and hit the 48th floor. The world I lived in during the day was on that number. The floor was empty, because I always got there before him. I walked to my desk, set my bag underneath, opened my computer, and before anything else, went into Mr. Ashcroft's office. I straightened the papers on the desk, changed the water, checked the room temperature, 66 degrees, the way he liked it, and made sure the Italian coffee was ready in the break room. After 2 years, I did all of that with my eyes closed. My phone buzzed when I got back to my spot. It was Ren, my best friend of 4 years, owner of a gallery in Chelsea, and an expert at dragging me to places I never belonged. In 4 years, I only knew the basics about her family. A distant father, a mother who died young, a brother she only described as complicated, who never showed up in any photo in her apartment. I never pushed. Anyone who grew up without a family learns to respect other people's silences. Saturday is the foundation gala. You thought about going? I laughed to myself and answered with 3 words. Who? Me? She sent an eye-roll emoji and a line about how I needed to get out of Queens before I turned into mildew. I put the phone away when the elevator doors opened. Dashiell Ashcroft came down the hallway with his leather briefcase in hand and his overcoat hanging open over his black suit. He walked past my desk without looking, like on the other 700 and some days I'd worked there, and went straight into his office. Never a full good morning, just a nod of the head at best. I'd already stopped expecting it. 11:10 in the morning. The Callaway file came back signed from legal, and I headed down the hallway connecting the finance department to the executive wing, with the folder pressed against my chest. His office door was cracked open, and the voices spilled out before my hand could touch the knob. I recognized Knox Ellery's, Dashiell's best friend since Princeton, senior partner at the firm, the one who laughed at jokes the boss never found funny, and the voices of 2 executives from finance. I was about to knock and go in, but my own name slipped through the crack before the knock could happen. I froze with my body leaning forward, folder held tight against my chest. Oh, come on, Dash. You wouldn't have the guts. Knox's voice came low and amused. Invite your own secretary to the gala, the ugly one. Someone laughed, one of the executives. The other joined in. The whole hallway seemed to tilt half an inch to the side. 50 grand, Knox went on. 50 grand if you take Marin on your arm into that ballroom Saturday. Double it, said one of the others, eager. 100 grand. And she has to smile. The folder started to feel heavy against my chest. I heard a leather chair creak, pictured Dashiell leaning back, pictured his face, the face I'd known in profile for 2 years, and that had never really looked at me. 100 grand, he repeated. For Marin. A short pause. Knox, you're paying way too much for a joke. That was the sentence that broke me apart inside. The others laughed. One of them tossed out a comment about me trying to fit into a decent dress, and I didn't catch the rest, because my chest had turned into a drum. But I didn't cry in the hallway, because I learned at 14 that hallways are no place to cry. I took 3 deep breaths, the way Ren had taught me one late night, straightened my back until my spine hurt, and waited for them to change the subject. When Knox started talking about the merger numbers, I knocked twice on the door and pushed it open. I walked in with my face set at the exact level of indifference that 2 years of practice teaches you to build. Knox was sitting on the black leather couch, ankles crossed, a pen spinning between his fingers. The 2 executives occupied the armchairs facing the desk. Dashiell was behind the dark wood desk, his chair half turned toward the window, as if the view of Manhattan was more interesting than the conversation I'd just overheard. I set the folder down on the right corner of his desk, where he liked me to leave it, and turned to go. "Marin," Knox's voice, sweet as arsenic. "Don't leave yet now." I stopped. He smiled, head tilted, and threw a glance at Dashiell. "Dash, weren't you going to invite someone for Saturday? For the foundation event?" The ambush closed in the air between us. "I don't think you've invited anyone yet, have you?" I felt Dashiell look at me for the first time in months, and he looked differently. He looked like someone who realizes the hallway has thin walls, like someone who understands that I understood. For a second I thought he'd back down, make up an excuse, dismiss me with a "Thanks, Marin, you can go." But Knox kept stretching out his smile. The $100,000 check was waiting to be torn up, and Dashiell Ashcroft had never lost a bet made out loud. He pushed the chair forward, rested his forearms on the desk, and looked me dead on. His jaw locked a millimeter before his mouth opened. "Marin, Foundation Gala, Saturday, 8 o'clock. You're coming with me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement designed not to fail in front of the 3 men who'd been laughing at me for the past 5 minutes. The 3 of them waited for the show. The blush, the stammering, the humbled thank you, the delirium of the secretary chosen by the billionaire boss. I took one breath, slowly, and lifted my chin half an inch. "Of course, Mr. Ashcroft." My voice came out steadier than my chest. "Email me the address. I'll be there, on time." Knox let out a laugh that wasn't humor. It was raw surprise. The other 2 lost their smiles halfway through. Dashiell, for the first time in 2 years, looked at me, didn't look past me, looked at me. His eyes traveled over my face, dropped down to the gray blouse, came back up, and stayed. I held his gaze for exactly the right amount of time before I turned. I left the office at my usual pace, closed the door with my usual care, and crossed the hallway without rushing. Only when I walked into the women's restroom on the floor, locked the stall door, sat down on the toilet lid, and put my hands to my face, did the trembling start. I didn't cry. I picked up my phone, opened my conversation with Ren, and typed 3 words. "I need help." Chapter 2. Until she walked into the ballroom. Ren rang the bell at 4 in the afternoon, with her finger so firm I heard the sound through the shower. I came out wrapped in a towel, opened the door, and ran straight into 3 designer garment bags stacked in the hallway, a man in a black apron holding a metal case, and my best friend in dark sunglasses, as if her apartment wasn't 10 minutes away. "Babe, move away from the door, because Marcello has 2 hours, and my patience is already at -1. She came in shoving the bags with her hip. "Marcello, the hair is that database of sadness you saw in the picture. Start from the beginning." Marcello smiled, greeted me with a short nod, and headed for the kitchen as if he knew the apartment. Ren, meanwhile, started unzipping the garment bags on my couch, with the efficiency of a woman who dressed a lot of people for a lot of things. She looked me up and down and shook her head, as if my existence offended her. "Marin Holloway, one of these days I'm going to figure out the aesthetic crime you're hiding under those cotton blouses, and I'm going to publish an exposé," Ren said, lifting a black velvet dress by the strap. "Because you have model shoulders, and you walk around like you're apologizing for your own skeleton." I laughed without meaning to, which was the effect she'd been going for these past 4 years. Ren dragged me into the bedroom, where Marcello had already set up the swivel chair in front of the dresser mirror. She made me sit down, took my glasses off, and put them on the nightstand as if they were recycling. Then she sat on the bed cross-legged, grabbed a glass of water from the nightstand, and stared at me in the reflection. "Now listen, because what I'm about to tell you is worth more than the dress." Her voice turned serious. "You are not walking into that ballroom begging for attention. You're not going to scan the room for Dashiell. You're not going to smile when he smiles. You're not going to go near him. You're going to walk in, you're going to ignore him, and you're going to leave first." Marcello started unwinding the bun with his fingers, and I closed my eyes. Ren kept going, the glass resting on her knee. "A man like this, Marin, needs resistance. He got where he got because nobody ever offered him anything for free. What he wants is what he can't buy over a dinner. If you walk in trying to please him, he'll follow through on the bet and send you home before midnight. If you walk in like he doesn't exist, babe, he'll forget his own name. I opened my eyes and looked at her through the mirror. Marcello was running a comb through my wet hair, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to pin it up. I let it happen. Ren smiled, without showing her teeth, and passed me the glass of water like it was a silent toast. At 8 o'clock sharp, the car pulled up in front of the plaza. The driver opened the door, and I stepped out with the caution of someone who'd never walked in heels without holding her breath. The dress was black, long, with a slit up to the thigh, and a thin neckline that ran up my neck in a velvet ribbon. My hair fell loose in wide waves. I wasn't wearing the glasses, and the Manhattan night air hit my eyes in a way I didn't recognize. I crossed the lobby with the walk Ren had rehearsed with me 3 times. Head high, shoulders back, not looking to the sides. The photographers covering the entrance turned when I walked by, and a few flashes went off before they decided whether it was worth it. One of the valets froze mid-stride, car keys dangling in the air, and I had to hold back a laugh inside. The staircase rose in 2 curves up to the ballroom on the 2nd floor, all in pale marble, and the gold railing gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. I went up with my hand free at hip height, because holding the railing would have required a pause I couldn't afford. At the top of the stairs, a small group of men in tuxedos was talking with glasses in hand. Dashiell was in the center, with Knox on his right, and 2 more partners on his left. He lifted his eyes in the middle of a sentence, and the sentence died in the air, because he stopped talking, stopped moving, stopped closing his mouth. His champagne glass tilted half a degree, before he caught himself. Knox turned his head slowly, followed his friend's line of sight, and let out a short laugh with no humor in it at all. "My God," Knox said. "That's the ugly one?" None of the others laughed. I walked past the group with a brief nod, without stopping, and slipped into the ballroom before Dashiell could recover the breath he'd forgotten to take. The ballroom was full of the people who paid the city's rent. Heirs, investors, models, a few movie actors I'd only ever seen on posters. I grabbed a glass at the bar set up along the west wall and faked interest in the label, just to have something to do with my hands. The music was live jazz, played by a quintet at the back of the room, and the couples were starting to move onto the dance floor in the center. A man with graying hair and an easy smile introduced himself as some Grayson, director of something at a law firm. I accepted the dance because Ren had been clear. Accept the dance, the wine, the conversation, anything that wasn't Dashiell. I spun around the floor with Grayson telling me about a vineyard in Napa, and I paid 0 attention, because I could feel Dashiell's eyes on my back from across the ballroom. I came back to the bar alone about 40 minutes later, my feet asking for a break. That was when she approached. "So you're the one." The voice came with an Italian accent and a sweet smile. "The secretary." I turned half a step. She was tall, with sleek black hair down to her waist, a blood-red dress molded to her body, and jewelry that weighed heavy on her thin neck. I recognized her face from some of the magazines that passed across Dashiell's desk, and I recognized the name before she said it. Sabine Marchetti, of the Italian wine family, the one whose Tuesday dinner he'd canceled 2 weeks ago by text, through me. Sabine Marchetti. She held out her hand delicately. I thought Dashiell was exaggerating when he said ugly, but now I get it. He was going easy on the adjectives. I shook her hand with exactly the right grip. No more, no less. I smiled with my mouth closed and tilted my head. "Sabine," I answered. "I think you're the one from Tuesday's dinner, the one at Le Bernardin." I remember canceling the email. Her face went red under the expensive makeup. Her hand pulled back from mine as if I'd burned her. "Good evening," she said, her accent harder now, and she walked off before my reply could land. I brought the glass to my lips and took a long sip. Across the ballroom, Dashiell was watching me without even pretending not to. I didn't look at him. At 11:15, as planned, I grabbed my coat from the coat check. I went down the staircase with the same walk I'd gone up with, crossed the lobby, and hailed a cab on the curb outside the plaza. The night had turned cold, and my breath came out in white smoke under the yellow lights of the marquee. A cab pulled up on the 3rd try. "Marin." His voice came from behind, low, and I didn't have to turn to know who it was. I stopped with my hand on the car door handle. Dashiell crossed the 3 yards of sidewalk with his overcoat open over his tuxedo and stopped a hand's width away. "You're leaving," he said. No question mark. "I'm leaving," I answered, and I looked at him for the first time since the staircase. "You invited me on a bet, Mr. Ashcroft. You won. You can go back to your friends." He lifted his hand as if to touch my elbow and stopped halfway, because I took half a step back before he could. His face changed. He wasn't used to backing off, and I could tell, from the way his jaw locked, that he didn't know what to do with the motion. "You don't owe me an explanation, but I owe you one," he started, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "Marin, Good night, Mr. Ashcroft." I got into the cab and shut the door. The driver shifted into gear, and in the side mirror I saw Dashiell standing on the curb, hands in his overcoat pockets, the wind lifting the hem of his coat. He didn't move until the car turned the corner, and I only let my left shoulder relax when Fifth Avenue swallowed the whole building behind me. Chapter 3. One Glass Too Many. The next 3 weeks turned into a silent game of advances and retreats, and I started recognizing the signs before they landed on my desk. On the Monday after the gala, I found a note folded on top of my keyboard. No envelope, in his handwriting. Just 3 words. "That was cowardly," and no signature. I put the note in the bottom drawer, where I kept the paperclips nobody used, and started my shift as if he didn't exist. On Wednesday, the assistant from finance brought me a coffee at lunchtime. A cappuccino from the Italian cafe on the ground floor, with the house's little card and a handwritten post-it that said, "Sorry about Monday, D." I sent Ren a picture of the cup, and her answer came in 30 seconds. "He's already obsessed, babe. Hold out a little longer." I drank the coffee, threw the post-it away, kept holding out. That Friday, he walked past my desk with his folder under his arm, and stopped for 2 seconds longer than necessary. I looked up. He opened his mouth and closed it without saying anything, and went into his office with a slightly heavier step. The next day, a printed invitation appeared. Dinner at La Grenouille, Friday, 8 o'clock. I answered by email with 2 professional lines declining the invitation, because my employment contract didn't cover dinners outside business hours. The following week was all about crossing paths in the elevator. He'd get in, I was already inside, and the 2 of us would stand there staring at the floor indicator as if the numbers were the most fascinating subject in the city. The second time, he mentioned that the Italian coffee had arrived in the break room, and I thanked him for the information. The third time, he asked if I'd gotten the invitation, and I said yes. He got off on the 42nd floor, 2 floors before ours, because it was the only way not to wait for my answer. In the third week, Ren texted me at 10 at night. "Babe, did he invite you to the hotel event?" I confirmed. "Go, and drink 1 glass more than you usually do. The rest, you know." I deleted the conversation before going to sleep, because I'd learned that some pieces of advice don't need rereading. The corporate event at the Ashcroft Midtown Hotel happened on Friday, 3 weeks after the gala. The second-floor ballroom was packed with investors from the Callaway merger, board executives, some invited journalists, and the ever-present gold plaque photos on the back wall. I arrived at 9, in a navy blue dress more understated than the one at the plaza, but with no bun and no glasses. Dashiell gave the opening speech on stage at 9:30, and during the 11 minutes he spoke, his eyes crossed mine twice. I grabbed my second glass of champagne after the speech. Sabine appeared before the third, as if she had a radar for my location. "You came back," she said, smile already in place. "What a thing. It's impressive how much time he's spending on you." She took a slow sip from her glass. "Men like Dashiell don't linger. When they linger, they're close to the end. You should start getting ready." I looked at her for 3 seconds without answering, then smiled with my mouth closed. "Sabine," I said, "if I were you, I'd save that advice for the next time your number drops off his phone." I raised my glass. "Cheers." She didn't answer, spun on her heels and disappeared into the crowd. I finished the champagne in 2 swallows, because my head was already getting heavy, and I left the ballroom through the side door. The hallway led to the service stairs, and the stairs went down to the hotel lobby. The lobby bar had low lights, black marble, a pianist playing an old standard I didn't recognize. I sat at the stool in the corner and ordered a double whiskey, because champagne wasn't going to hold whatever came next. "Same for me," his voice said to my left. I didn't turn. I heard the stool next to mine scrape the floor, the bartender pouring, the ice hitting the glass. Dashiell tugged at his tuxedo collar a little, undid the top button of his shirt, and stared at the counter for a few seconds before speaking. "Why do you run, Marin?" I took a sip of the whiskey. My throat burned, and I let it burn. "Because you are exactly the man who called me ugly to win a bet." I turned my face and looked at him. "And because you're my boss." In that order. He didn't laugh, didn't react right away, spun the glass between his fingers and looked at his own reflection in the mirror behind the counter. "I was an idiot that night." His voice came out hoarse. "I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't." He turned toward me. "Marin, I'd undo it. I can't. So I'm trying the second best thing, which is asking you to give me time." Time for what? To figure it out. The whiskey had warmed my chest, and I knew I should get up, pay for the glass, go back to the apartment, and sleep off the hangover tomorrow. but his gaze was fixed, his breath was close, and there were 3 weeks of silence built up between us, stacked glass by glass. I set the glass on the counter. "You're not going to like what you figure out," I murmured. He leaned in a fraction. His hand brushed mine, not grabbing, just brushing, his thumb passing once over the back of my hand. "Let me choose that." The private elevator was behind a dark wood door in the corner of the lobby, hidden by a frosted glass screen. He pulled a card from his inner pocket, ran it through the reader, and the door opened with an almost imperceptible click. We stepped in together without speaking, and he pressed the top floor. The elevator started climbing, and I looked at the reflection of the two of us in the mirrored panel. Me, in the blue dress, face flushed from whiskey. Him, tuxedo open, his hand half a centimeter from mine. The air inside the cabin was thick, loaded with everything we hadn't said all night. The silence stretched between us like a taut rope. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror before shifting back to my actual face. The soft light of the elevator drew gentle shadows on his jaw, and I felt my chest tighten with the sudden closeness. Without a word, he lifted his hand and touched my chin with his fingertips, tilting my face upward. My heart raced. It was the first kiss, the moment when everything we'd held back was set loose. His lips met mine with a gentleness that contrasted with the urgency vibrating in the air. The touch was warm, slow, as if he wanted to savor every second of the discovery. The subtle taste of whiskey mingled with his, something deep and intoxicating that made me lean my body against his. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, while the elevator rose in silence, oblivious to the world left behind. The kiss deepened with care, breaths weaving together in a shy, hungry dance. When we pulled apart, breathless, his eyes were dark, full of a promise that made my stomach turn over. He didn't say anything. He just rested his forehead against mine for a brief moment, as if he needed to collect himself before the doors opened. The presidential suite took up the entire floor, with glass walls on both sides and Manhattan gleaming down below like a carpet of lights. He unlocked it with another card, opened the door, and waited for me to walk in first. The living room was spacious, with a grand piano near the window and a pale velvet sofa turned toward the view. We crossed the room to the bedroom, at the end of the hall, and the door closed behind us. He stopped in the middle of the room, a step away from the wide bed, and turned to me. The lamplight yellowed his face, and for the first time, I saw Dashiell without the armor, without the dark wood desk, without the partners around him, without the glass-walled floor. "Marin," his voice came low. "If you want to leave, the door is behind you. I won't hold you back." I took a step toward him, put my hand in the middle of his chest over the white shirt, and felt his heart beating hard under the fabric. His heart was beating fast as mine, and that was what disarmed me, knowing he was all the way there too. "I want to," I whispered. He kissed me before I finished the word. His mouth was warm, breath tasting of whiskey and something else, something that had no name, and his hands found the nape of my neck and my waist at the same time. I felt his weight push me slowly against the mattress, the zipper of my dress sliding down my back, the velvet slipping off my shoulders. I closed my eyes for a second, and when I opened them, he was looking at me as if the world had stopped 100 floors away. "Look at me," he asked, hoarse. "While I'm touching you, look at me." I looked. His hand came down my shoulder, passed over the skin of my collarbone, and I arched my body without deciding to. His other hand went up my thigh, slow, found the edge of my stocking, stopped at the exact limit before I asked him to keep going. I asked. He kept going. With soft, reverent movements, he explored every line of my body as if he were uncovering a secret kept for a long time. His fingers traced light paths over my skin, stirring up shivers that spread like soft waves under the warm lamplight. He moved with infinite delicacy, bringing his lips to places that made my breath escape in broken sighs. A patient, deep caress that built something warm and pulsing at the center of me. The pleasure grew slowly, like a tide rising without hurry, wrapping me in layers of sweet, intense sensation, until I surrendered to it with a long sigh, my body trembling lightly against his, lost in a wave of pure abandon. When his shirt fell to the floor, I saw for the first time what he hid under the suit, the firm chest, the thin scar on the side of his abdomen, the way his breathing sped up with each of my touches. I brought my mouth to his neck, and he moaned low, a sound he tried to swallow and couldn't. "Dashiell," I whispered, and the name came out more intimate than any word before it. He lay down over me, his weight controlled, propped up on his forearms. When he joined with me, it was slow, almost reverent, a single movement that made me close my eyes and grab the sheet. His breath trembled in my ear. He stopped for an instant, as if he needed that moment, and then started moving, with steady pressure, with deliberate rhythm, His hand splayed in the middle of my back, as if he were afraid I'd disappear. I didn't disappear. I rose with him, for the first time whole, for the first time hiding nothing. The glasses, the bun, the gray blouse, all of it had stayed behind in the world's lobby. The pleasure came in a slow wave I didn't recognize, growing in delicate layers, each movement bringing us closer to the edge. Our bodies moved in harmony, breaths mixing, eyes meeting in moments of pure vulnerability. I dug my fingers into his shoulders and let it happen. He followed me 2 seconds later, face buried in my neck, with a muffled sound that went right through my chest. We lay still, the two of us, with heavy breathing and thin sweat on our skin. And I understood, lying under his body, with his hand splayed on my back, that it was the first time in my whole life I'd ever felt wanted completely. He fell asleep before me, his hand still splayed on my back, his face buried in my hair. I stared at the white plaster ceiling for a length of time I couldn't measure. Manhattan glittered through the glass window, the cars passed small down below, and his chest rose and fell against my shoulder in a calm rhythm. I closed my eyes and thought that I couldn't stay for the morning. Not with the bet still echoing, not with Sabine in the ballroom, not with his overcoat standing on the plaza curb 3 weeks ago. I'd learned early that leaving with dignity was the only kind of leaving that didn't leave a scar. I counted the minutes until his breathing turned heavy, then I counted 10 more. Chapter 4. The day everything turned. 6:25 in the morning. I opened my eyes in the dark and found the white plaster ceiling of the suite, with the gray dawn light coming in through the glass. Dashiell's hand was still on my back, open, heavy, the ring on his right pinky pressing into my skin. I slowly turned my face. He was sleeping with his mouth slightly open, hair fallen over his forehead, his face younger than I'd ever seen during work hours. I got up in 2 movements, without making a sound. I gathered the dress off the bedroom floor, the shoes from under the chair, the bag on top of the dresser. I carried everything to the bathroom, shut the door, and got dressed in silence, with the dress zipper pulled only halfway because reaching it alone hurt my shoulder. I looked at my reflection in the mirror for 2 seconds, smudged mascara, messy hair, the red mark on my neck, and wiped my face with a cold towel. I crossed the bedroom on tiptoe, shoes in hand, and passed by his bed without looking back. The suite's living room was dim, the grand piano catching the first sunlight. I opened the door, stepped out, pushed it carefully until I heard the click of the lock. The hallway on the floor was empty, the carpet silent under my feet. I took the elevator, hit the ground floor, and only put my shoes on once the elevator started going down. The lobby was empty, except for the night receptionist dozing behind the counter. I crossed the marble with my coat held tight against my chest, went out through the revolving door, and the cold Manhattan air hit my face like a dry slap. I ordered a cab through the app, got into the back seat, and only when the car crossed 5th Avenue did I let the first tear slide down. The second came right after. The third didn't come. I managed to stop at the third. I got to the Queen's apartment at 7:40, took a 15-minute shower, and washed my face 3 times. I put on my old gray cotton pajamas, lay down in bed, and stared at the cracked ceiling until my phone buzzed with Ren's message asking for a recap. I answered with just 1 sentence. "I'll tell you later." I locked the phone. I slept on my back, with my hand splayed over my own chest, as if I needed an anchor to replace the one I'd left on the highest floor of the city. Monday, 8 in the morning. I got out of the elevator on the 48th floor, with my hair loose in wide waves, no glasses, wearing a white silk blouse Ren had left in the first garment bag the Saturday before. I walked to my desk at my usual pace, opened my computer, and went into Mr. Ashcroft's office to leave the day's schedule on the desk, like every Monday. He arrived at 8:20. He came down the hallway with his usual firm step, but he stopped in front of my desk and stood there for 2 seconds. I looked up. His face had no color. His mouth opened and closed before a word could come out. "Good morning, Mr. Ashcroft," I said, my voice at the usual pitch. "The schedule is on your desk. Mr. Daines confirmed the 1 o'clock lunch. The board meeting was moved up half an hour because of Mr. Calloway's flight." He looked at me for another 3 seconds, opened his mouth again, and this time, a word almost came out before he swallowed it. He walked past my desk without answering, went into his office, closed the door without slamming it. The whole day went like that. He came out of his office at 10 to grab a coffee from the break room and walked slowly past my desk. I looked up, said, "Do you need anything, Mr. Ashcroft?" And he shook his head. He got into the elevator at 2 in the afternoon for a meeting on the 15th floor and buzzed me on the intercom at 2:05 to ask if I could go over the merger materials. I answered that I was already on it. At 6, he came out of his office with his overcoat over his arm, stopped by my desk, and I didn't look up. "Maren," he said low, "Good night, Mr. Ashcroft." He stood there for a few more seconds. Then he walked to the elevator. When the doors closed, I saved the file I had open, shut down the computer, and went home on the subway. Wednesday, 6:30. The office had been empty for almost an hour, because most of the executives on the floor had gone out to some investor dinner. I'd run late to finish a presentation, and only went into the women's restroom at 6:15. I came out washing my hands at 6:25, walked down the empty hallway to the elevator, and hit the button. The elevator came empty. I got in, pressed the ground floor, and when the doors started to close, a hand jammed between them and forced them open. Dashiell came in with his overcoat unbuttoned, his tie loosened, and a look that 2 years of working together had never shown me, contained hunger. He pressed a button on the panel without taking his eyes off me. The number 11 lit up, and the elevator stopped with a light jolt between 2 floors. "Why, Marin?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Tell me why." I pressed my back against the mirrored panel. I held the folder against my chest as if it were a shield. "Mr. Ashcroft, please, release the elevator." "Why?" "Because I chose to," I answered. "Because I chose to leave before you chose for me to leave. Because I'm not going to be the 3rd page of your agenda next week. Release the elevator, please." He walked over to me in 2 steps. The folder was pulled from my chest and set down on the elevator floor. His hand came up to my chin and held it, his thumb resting at the corner of my mouth. "You're not leaving, Marin. You're running." His voice got lower. "And I don't accept running." He kissed me before I answered, and I didn't answer. I didn't answer with words. My hands went up to his collar. My fingers found the hair at the nape of his neck, and I gave in because my body had memory, and memory doesn't forgive. His mouth came down my neck. His other hand found my thigh, slid down the side of my skirt, and came up underneath. I felt his fingers trace the skin of my inner thigh, slow, with the patience of someone who knows his time is going to be the time he chooses. "You still want me," he murmured in my ear. "I can feel it. No point running, Marin." When his hand came back up, he looked at his own finger for a second and brought it to his mouth, eyes fixed on mine. No hurry. He sucked the finger slowly, thumb still on my chin, and I forgot to breathe the exact instant the elevator panel let out a chime, and the doors opened on the 11th floor. Knox Ellery was standing on the other side, a folder under his arm, and his left eyebrow raised all the way up to his hairline. He looked at us for one whole second, with the expression of a man who'd already seen everything in life, and still managed to be surprised. Then he took a step back, held up his index finger, and nodded once. "I'll catch the next one," Knox said. "Sure, no rush." The doors started to close, and he managed to add with the most serious face in the world, "Good night, Marin," before the gap narrowed. I pushed Dashiell away, grabbed the folder off the floor, hit the ground floor button, and got out of the elevator the minute it hit the lobby. I ran across the lobby in heels, because dignity had a limit, and mine had just crossed it. Friday night, 10:15. The buzzer at my apartment rang, and I knew who it was before I opened the door. He came in without asking, closed the door behind him, and stood there in the cramped living room, overcoat still on his shoulder, looking around as if my apartment were a place he didn't know existed. "Mr. Ashcroft," I said, crossing my arms. "What are you doing here?" "I left the mister down in the lobby," he answered with an almost smile. "Doesn't fit in here." He took off the overcoat, dropped it on the sofa, and walked over to my kitchen as if I'd invited him. He saw the coffee mug on the sink, the tea box on the shelf, the fridge magnet from Wren's gallery. He took in the space with an attention I hadn't seen from anyone inside that apartment in 4 years. "You're not staying," I said. "End of night, end of visit. You don't sleep with secretaries, Mr. Ashcroft." "That's what they say. They say a lot of things," he answered, turning to me. "I'm staying, Marin. Tonight I'm staying." And he stayed. We went through the living room, stopped in the kitchen where he made tea without asking, and then down the narrow hallway to the bedroom. What happened in the bedroom stayed between the two of us, with no details, because the details had already been paid for on the highest floor of the hotel. He slept next to me for the first time in his life, arm thrown across my body, and heavy breathing against my shoulder. I woke up at 3 a.m, turned my face on the pillow, and watched him in the dark. His face in sleep was the same face as that morning in the suite, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I was starting to feel. Saturday, 3:10. The whole week had been like that. Nights at my apartment, secrecy at the office by day, notes passed back and forth on my desk with the kind of care that felt like something out of a rich teenager's life. He was in my kitchen making coffee, because he'd promised he'd learn to make decent coffee before the end of the month, and I had dozed off on the couch with a book open on my chest. I woke up to the sound of a spoon falling on the kitchen floor. I opened my eyes, turned my head, and saw Dashiell standing in the living room, facing the low bookshelf I'd pushed against the wall. The bookshelf had 3 shelves with books, a small plant, and a picture frame. He was holding the picture frame in his hand, his fingers white on the frame, and his face was white as the wall. "Marin," his voice came out dry. "Do you know Ren?" I sat up on the couch, rubbed my eyes, took 2 seconds to understand the question. "My best friend?" "Yeah, of course," I answered. "Why?" The frame showed Ren and me hugging in the middle of Sheep Meadow in Central Park 2 years ago. Photo taken on a cell phone, printed at a kiosk, framed out of pure sentimentality. He looked at the photo, looked at me, and his face changed in a fraction of a second. I'd never seen his face change like that. "Ren is my sister," he said. The world stopped. The apartment, the afternoon light coming in the window, the spoon on the kitchen floor, everything stopped. The book fell from my chest to the floor, and I didn't even hear the thud. I opened my mouth to answer and couldn't, because my brain had taken too long to process the sentence. And when it processed, it started adding up the pieces on its own, without my permission. The Ren who never showed a family photo. The Ren who signed the gallery with a last name I'd never questioned. The Ren who'd sent my resume by chance to the biggest company in the city. The Ren who'd never come to pick me up at work in 2 years. Not once, not even for a quick lunch. I sat on the couch with my jaw slowly dropping, because the woman I'd known for 4 years was rearranging herself right in front of my eyes into a version I didn't recognize. He looked me in the eyes, and I saw the construction happen in real time. Him adding up the gala, adding up the bet, adding up the 3 weeks, adding up the suite, adding up the elevator, adding up the picture frame. "How long have you two known each other?" His voice came out controlled, and it was worse than if he'd shouted. 4 years, I answered. "Dashiell, I didn't know. She never—" 4 years, he repeated, and she never said. She never said. I swear. If I'd known my best friend was the sister of the man who hired me, do you think I would have spent 2 years bringing coffee into your office without saying a word? Do you think I would have agreed to work for you in the first place? I got up from the couch. My legs were weaker than I expected, and I had to steady my hand on the arm of the furniture so I wouldn't sit back down. I took 2 steps toward him. I wanted to touch his arm and didn't, because his face told me that touching him in that second would be a disaster. "Look at me," I asked. "Look at me for real. I'm the same person you saw in the lobby of the plaza. I'm the same person you kissed in the elevator. I'm the same person who slept in your bed a week ago and made you tea last night. I didn't change in 5 minutes because of a photo." He looked at the photo again. His fingers tightened on the frame, and for a second I thought the frame was going to break. His gaze swept through my apartment, the coffee mug on the sink, the magnet from Ren's gallery on the fridge, her cardigan thrown over the kitchen chair, the ticket from an exhibit 2 months ago taped to the tile with masking tape. Everything in the apartment had a piece of her in it, and now everything in the apartment had turned into evidence against me. I watched his reasoning chase the version that made the most sense, and his face told me which version he chose before his mouth confirmed it. It wasn't mine. "I've been played before, Marin." His voice dropped a tone. "By people who smiled the same way you smiled. I've learned to recognize it. I'm not those people. Maybe not, but I need air. Dashiell." My voice cracked on the second syllable, and I hated that it cracked. "Wait, don't leave like this. If you walk out now, believing this, I don't know if I can undo it later." He stopped. For 1 whole second, he stopped. I saw his chest rise and fall once, slowly, and I saw his free hand open and close at his side. He wanted to stay. I recognized it the same way I'd recognized, in the suite, that he was all the way there. The difference was that this time the whole was split in half, and the wrong half was winning. He set the frame on top of the shelf, with a calm that hurt me more than a shout would have, grabbed his overcoat from the sofa, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the doorknob. "I should have seen it," he said, without looking back. He left. The door slammed. I sat on the couch for 40 seconds, not understanding what had just happened. Then I took a deep breath, grabbed the phone off the side table, and called Ren. She picked up on the second ring. "Come over now," I said, before she could say anything. "You have a lot of explaining to do." Chapter 5. The Heir's Choice. I hung up the phone at 3:40 in the afternoon. Ren said, "I'm on my way." Her voice cracked, and I answered, "No, only tonight. I need time." The hours between that phone call and the buzzer ringing were the longest I'd spent inside 4 walls in a long time. I walked from one room to the other, unable to sit down. I grabbed the teacup of his that was still in the sink, washed it, dried it, put it away. I took Ren's gallery magnet off the fridge, held it in my hand for a minute, put it back. I opened the fridge 3 times without knowing what I was looking for. I lay in bed for 20 minutes, got up, made another tea I didn't drink. By 6 in the evening it was already dark outside, and I finally sat on the couch, with the tea cooling in my hand, and waited. Ren arrived at 9:15 that same night, her coat crooked on her shoulder, and her face already braced for the blow. She came in without saying anything, set her bag on the floor near the couch, took off the coat, and sat down in the armchair without waiting for an invitation. I was standing near the window, holding the cold teacup, because sitting would have looked like permission to be comfortable, and she hadn't come here to be comforted. I looked at her for a few seconds before I spoke. I thought about 4 years of late nights at her apartment in Chelsea, cheap wine and shared blanket. I thought about the Christmas when she took me to her mom's house, which I now understood was somebody else's house, borrowed, theater. I thought about the birthday when she cried on my shoulder because of a man in the family who had ruined Thanksgiving, and I'd comforted her without even knowing his name. Every memory of the two of us now had a shadow behind it, a piece I hadn't seen at the time. "Talk," I said. "From the beginning." She looked at her own hands for a second, then lifted her eyes. "Dashiell is my brother," she began, voice low. "Older brother, 6 years apart, same dad and same mom. We don't use the Ashcroft name in our personal lives, babe. I've signed as Ren Marin since I was 18, because I didn't want my father's name opening doors for me. Keep going. I met you 4 years ago," Ren went on, "at that gas station, that night. You didn't even really know me, and I took you home because I wasn't going to leave you there shaking. 4 months later, you became the best friend I've ever had in my life, and I never told you about Dashiell for the same reason I never gave you any detail about my family. You knew the titles, dad, mom, brother. I never gave you the names. I'm not that last name, Marin. I didn't want to be. When you started working for him, I froze. I knew I should tell you. I didn't tell you because you would have left that same day, and I didn't want to lose you a second time." The word second hung in the air between us, and I noted it, without answering. She'd understand later. Some debts you collect in installments. "Ren," my voice came out steadier than I expected. "Did you send my resume to Dashiell?" She took a deep breath, nodded her head up and down. "Once." "I did," her voice caught. 2 years ago. I sent the resume through the internal channel without telling you. When you told me you'd been called in for the executive assistant interview, I put on a surprised face. I let you think it was a coincidence." Something inside my chest made a small sound, like glass cracking without breaking. I set the teacup down on the window table before my hand decided on its own to hurl it. I crossed the room slowly, stopped in front of her, and crossed my arms. 2 years, I said. 2 years you looked me in the face and pretended my whole life was coincidence. 2 years of every email, every meeting, every story I told you about my boss, thinking you were just my friend. You heard everything, Ren. Everything. And you smiled. She covered her mouth with her hand before the first tear got there, but the tear got there before her hand closed. "Marin." "No, not yet." I sat on the couch across from her, set the teacup on the coffee table without making a sound, because if I'd made a sound the cup would have broken, and I didn't have the budget for a new teacup that month. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Because I thought the two of you would recognize each other," she answered, without looking away. "I have a brother who doesn't look at anyone, babe, and I have a best friend who doesn't let herself be looked at. I figured that if you two were on the same floor every day, one day something would happen. I was wrong not to tell you, wrong not to tell him too, but I didn't plan any of what happened from Saturday until now. I swear on my gallery." I rested my hands on my knees and looked at the rug for a length of time I couldn't measure. Ren didn't interrupt me, because she knew that interrupting my silence was suicide. Then I lifted my head. "You lied to him by omission. You lied to me by omission. And now, the three of us are paying for it." My voice came out flat. "He left here today thinking I was a piece in a plan of yours. He thinks I knew from the start, that I was chosen, that the bet was a play of ours. He thinks I set him up with you." Ren covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes filled up all at once, and the first tear fell before she took her second breath. "Marin, I'll call him right now. I'll go to his place. You won't." I cut her off. "You won't call him. You won't go to his place. You won't text him. Tomorrow morning I'm going to Ashcroft Holdings, and I'm going to talk to him, and I'm going to talk to him in front of whoever is in that lobby. You're going to stay home. You had 4 years to talk, Ren. Now it's my turn." She shook her head, nodded, and didn't say anything else. She stayed on the couch with me until midnight, her hand resting on mine, because she understood that silence was the only currency she still had to pay me with. At 10 past midnight, I asked her to leave. She left, and I went to bed without showering, because the courage for the next day needed to start in the dirty sheets he'd left behind. Monday, 7:30 in the morning. I chose the black high-necked dress with 3/4 sleeves, mid-heel shoes, hair loose with wide waves, no glasses. I put on the red lipstick Ren had given me as a Christmas gift that I'd never worn. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for 5 seconds and didn't recognize the woman looking back. Recognizing her was a job for next week. I got a cab on the corner because the subway didn't suit the pace I was in, paid the fare by card, and the car dropped me on Lexington Avenue at 9:15. Before getting out, I grabbed my phone and called Ren. She picked up on the first ring. "You're not coming," I said. "I'm the one talking." "Okay." Her voice came out quiet. "Okay, babe, go." I hung up, got out of the cab, crossed the sidewalk, and walked through the revolving door of Ashcroft Holdings. The lobby was crowded, like every Monday morning. Investors with briefcases in hand, executives from finance standing around near the elevators, 2 photographers leaning against the reception counter, because the merger with Callaway was going to be announced there that week. I walked straight up to the white marble counter. Jacinta Ruiz, head receptionist who always greeted me in the hallway, lifted her head from the computer, and her face wrinkled in surprise. "Miss Holloway," she started quietly. "Mr. Ashcroft asked that." "Jacinta," I cut in, my voice firm. "He can fire me later. Right now I need to get through." She looked at me for a second, blinked, and took half a step back. I went past the counter, walked to the center of the lobby, and stopped on top of a dark marble star that marked the company logo on the floor. The ceiling rose 3 stories above my head, with the panoramic glass elevator fitted into the west wall, going up and down like a living display case. I turned my head once and recognized the 2 wrong faces in the group on the left. Sabine Marchetti in a gray pantsuit, next to Knox Ellery with a folder under his arm, the 2 of them waiting for some meeting I didn't want to know about. Sabine saw me and her smile started to assemble itself. Knox saw me, and his smile died before it was born. He understood before she did. The panoramic elevator started coming down from the top floor. I followed its route with my eyes. It passed the 30th, the 20th, the 10th, and I saw Dashiell's silhouette standing inside the cabin, with his overcoat over his shoulder and his eyes fixed on nothing. When the elevator stopped on the ground floor and the doors opened, he took 2 steps out before he saw me, and he saw me. He stopped. His briefcase dropped half an inch in his hand before he adjusted his grip. The whole lobby noticed the movement, because the whole lobby was trained to track Dashiell Ashcroft, and wherever he stopped, all eyes stopped with him. I took a step forward, filled my chest with air, and spoke loud enough for the marble to echo. "Mr. Ashcroft." My voice hit the ceiling, came back, hit again. The conversations around us vanished. Jacinta froze with the phone halfway in her hand. Sabine stretched her smile a millimeter. Knox went still. "I didn't know," I went on. "I didn't know Ren was your sister. I found out yesterday evening, when you walked out of my apartment. I wasn't chosen. I wasn't a piece of anyone's plan. I interviewed for the position thinking it was a coincidence. I brought you coffee for 2 years without knowing my best friend was your sister. I never knew, and I would never have lied. And if you think I arranged my life to cross paths with yours, you don't know who I am." I caught my breath. The whole lobby turned to glass. The photographers at the reception counter raised their cameras, not sure if they should. "I didn't come here to apologize," I said. "I don't owe any. I came here to speak in front of the whole building because you walked out of my apartment without listening to me, and I don't accept anyone walking out of anywhere without listening to me anymore. Listen to me now, Mr. Ashcroft, or fire me now. One or the other." The whole lobby waited for the answer. Sabine took a deep breath, anticipating the killing blow. Knox closed his eyes for half a second and opened them. Jacinta let go of the phone. Dashiell walked over to me. 3 steps. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't slow. It was the step of a man who had crossed 58 floors to get to that marble. He stopped half a meter away, briefcase still in his hand, and looked at me from above, and then from far away, and then from close up. He saw Ren on my forehead, saw queens on my hands, saw the presidential suite in my eyes. "Call her now," I said, low enough for only him to hear. "Call Ren in front of everybody. Ask her. I'll wait." He looked at me for 2 seconds. Then he took his phone out of his pocket, without looking away from me, dialed, and put it on speaker. The whole lobby heard the ring. 1 ring, 2. She answered on the 3rd. "Dash, Ren, in front of Marin, right now." Did she know? No. Ren's voice came out firm, no pause. She never knew. I lied. By omission on both sides. Sue me later if you want. She has nothing to do with this. He hung up without answering, put the phone back in his pocket, looked at me again, and his face had changed in the middle of the call. Not all of it, but enough. "I'm sorry." Loud. Loud enough for Sabine to hear. Loud enough for Knox to hear. Loud enough for Jacinta to hear. Loud enough for the Callaway merger to hear. "I'm sorry, Marin," he repeated. "I saw the photo. I saw my sister's name, and I put together a story that was a lie. I walked out of your apartment without listening to you, and I spent the night knowing I'd left before listening. I spent 2 years walking past your desk without looking at you, and I spent 4 days thinking I could lose you for good. And those 2 things are the 2 biggest mistakes of my life. I'm sorry. He took another half step. His free hand came up to my face and stopped a finger's width from my cheek, waiting. I didn't pull back. He rested his hand on my cheek. Stay with me, he said, lower but not hiding it from anyone. I was silent for 2 seconds, because the air had vanished from the lobby, and I had to pull it from somewhere. Then I nodded, once, with the whole weight of my past placed in that millimeter of head movement. He kissed me. In the middle of the white marble lobby, with investors, executives, photographers, Sabine Marchetti and Knox Ellery as witnesses. The flashes started 3 seconds later, when the photographers remembered what they were there for. Sabine spun on her heels and went out the revolving door before the cameras could catch her face. Jacinta sat down slowly behind the counter, hand over her mouth. Knox was the first to applaud, alone, a dry, short clap, the kind of applause a best friend gives when the other has solved an equation that took decades. Dashiell pulled his mouth away from mine, rested his forehead against mine, and closed his eyes for a second. Then he took my hand, and the 2 of us crossed the lobby toward the door. We passed Knox. He'd already stopped clapping, and the smile was almost back in its usual place. I stopped 1 step before the revolving door, turned my head halfway, and looked at him. Knox. Morin. 100 grand, I said, at the exact volume for him to hear, and no one else. That's what I was worth, wasn't it? When you thought I was too ugly for a ballroom? The color drained from his face under the expensive tan. He opened his mouth. I didn't wait. Send it to Dashiell's foundation, in my name, by the end of the month. I smiled with my mouth closed. Then we can talk about friendship. I turned my face back toward the door, squeezed Dashiell's hand, and we walked out. The photographers came out after us, of course. 3 of them were already on the sidewalk before the revolving door spit us out. I didn't care. He didn't either. Chapter 6. The first headline. Dashiell's penthouse took up the top 2 floors of a dark brick building on the Upper East Side, with a view of Central Park. He picked me up by car at 9 p.m. that Friday, opened the passenger door without saying a word, and I got in wearing the dark green dress Wren had left on top of my bed with a handwritten post-it. The post-it said, "Forgive me when you're ready. Love, W." I'd stuck the note on the fridge without answering yet. The building's private elevator went straight up to the penthouse and opened into a vestibule with dark wood floors and exposed concrete walls. He unlocked the door, waited for me to go in first, and the living room opened in front of me in a silence 30 feet high. There was a gray leather sofa facing a lit fireplace, a long dining table against the wall, and the entire back glass wall looked out over the park darkened by night. "So, this is it," I said, hands in my coat pockets. "You live here alone?" "I do," he answered, hanging his overcoat on the standing coat rack. "Sometimes I forget that." He took me out to the terrace, which was a rooftop garden set up over the building's slab, with plants in ceramic pots and a round marble table in the corner. The city blinked down below. The park was a dark stain with little lamplights inside, and the autumn breeze carried the smell of something roasting on the neighboring rooftop. He opened a bottle of wine that was already on the table, filled 2 glasses, and handed me one without asking if I wanted it. "I was going to cook," he said, with a crooked half-smile. "I tried to make pasta an hour ago. I ended up calling the chef. What happened? I'm still figuring out how the pot decided to catch fire," he answered. "The official theory is that I turned on the water instead of the oil. The chef's theory is that I can't cook, and he's going to sue me if I repeat the experiment in the kitchen he oversees." I laughed. I laughed for real, glass near my mouth, and the laughter crossed the rooftop and faded somewhere on 5th Avenue. He looked at me with a different look, less guest, and more owner of his own house, and clinked his glass against mine with a dry click. "Here," he said, pulling a small rectangular box from the inner pocket of his jacket. "It's not a ring. Before you panic." I opened it carefully. Inside, on a black velvet lining, there was a thin gold pendant in the shape of a tiny key, with a delicate chain. I looked at him. "It's the one to the suite," he explained, voice low. "A copy, in case you decide to come back whenever you want, without having to tell anyone, without having to ask for a card at reception." I closed the box slowly, set it on the table, walked over to him, put my arms around his neck, and he kissed me on the forehead with a pressure I didn't know a mouth was capable of. We stayed like that for a while, the 2 of us standing on the terrace, with Manhattan breathing under us, and, for the first time in 2 years, I allowed myself to feel that my place could be there. We came back inside at 11:30 because the wind had turned colder than was bearable, and he had to take a quick call from Monaco about a hotel opening the following week. I left him in the living room with the phone to his ear and walked over to the long dining table. There was a tablet open in the corner, its brightness on, and the screen was showing a gossip column someone had left in standby. The headline was in big white letters on a black background. The Golden Bachelor reeled in the secretary. Who is Marin Holloway? Below it, 3 photos placed side by side. The first was me coming out of the Ashcroft Holdings lobby on Monday, with Dashiell beside me holding my hand, both of us with tired faces under the sidewalk sun. I remembered the photo. The photographers had gone off 2 meters before the revolving door. The second was me at a company event the year before, in glasses, hair pulled back, at the back of the ballroom, with a coffee tray in my hand. Someone had dug up the image from some internal archive or group photo. I accepted its existence because an archive was an archive. The third one stopped me. The third photo was me stepping out of the car at the plaza on the night of the gala, in the black dress with the slit, hair loose in the wind, the yellow light of the marquee hitting my face. It was a tight close-up. The framing was that of a professional photographer hidden in the corner, and the caption underneath said, "The first public appearance, 5 weeks ago." I didn't remember being photographed that night. No one had asked. No one had come near. I pressed my finger on the screen, zoomed in on the image, and looked at my own face in the photo. Someone had photographed me from an angle that required studied positioning. Someone had known I was going to be there. A cold tip traveled down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was a warning, as if my body were telling me, with the calm of an observation, that his world hadn't yet charged him for the choice he'd made in the lobby. Not yet, but that bill was coming. I heard him hang up the phone in the living room. I closed the tablet, shut off the brightness, flipped the device face down. When he turned his face and looked at me from the kitchen, holding a water bottle in his hand, I smiled. I smiled for real. No shadow anywhere, because that night was still ours, and the rest of the world could wait until morning. He came over to me, handed me the bottle, and rested his hand in the middle of my back. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I answered. "I was just thinking about the pasta. Next time, call the chef first." He laughed low, pulled me by the waist, and kissed me on the temple. I tucked the key into the pocket of my dress, felt the small weight of the metal rest against my thigh, and let him lead me to the sofa in the living room. The headline stayed on the tablet, in silence, waiting for the next day. I still wasn't going to ask. Hey, Kay here. That's it for book 1. But guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee. It had been 6 weeks since my face was plastered all over the gossip columns next to his name. 6 weeks of photographers at the curb of the apartment, of people stopping mid-sentence when I stepped into the elevator. 6 weeks of learning how to walk hand in hand with Dashiell Ashcroft without tripping over my own shoes. And somewhere in those 6 weeks, I made the worst mistake a woman like me could make. I forgot who I was. I forgot where I came from. Life was too good for me to remember the shadows I'd spent years burying. Until the Thursday I walked through the revolving door of Ashcroft Holdings and saw that man standing on the marble of the lobby. Investors stopped. 3 cell phones went up at the same time, and I, at the center of that marble, forgot to breathe. He opened his mouth. "Enjoy the luxury while it lasts. But don't forget, he treats you like a queen because he doesn't know about your past. He can dress you in silk and take you to his bed, Marin. But I'm the one who still lives in your nightmares." The past had found me, and this time, it came armed with my name in the papers, and a story to tell. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to catch the upcoming ones, look for Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channels are Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. With love, Kay.